Welcome to the newest episode of the More People podcast. I'm your host, Richard Hanwell, Managing Director for More People. I'm thrilled to say that we've got Jacqui Green with us today. Welcome, Jacqui.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Jacqui, if you'd be so kind as just to introduce yourself to our audience.
My name's Jacqui Green. I've worked in the produce industry for over 30 years, predominantly in fresh fruit, and now I have my own business. I'm a non-exec director. I do professional coaching and mentoring, and I'm also the part-time CEO of a charity in my hometown of Tunbridge Wells.
I'm intrigued as to how and why you got into the industry.
It wasn't, as you've probably heard from most people who've interviewed, necessarily intentional. I studied law and French and Spanish, and I had dreams of being a hotshot kind of European lawyer. And I've just found it was all really contractual law, and I just found it really dry. And it just sort of stifled my creativity. So I knew probably halfway through the course I didn't want to go on to be a lawyer. So I really just thought that languages was my passion. It was what I was good at. At the time I was living with my parents, not far from Paddock Wood, which at the time and still is a bit of a hub of fresh produce.
Very much so, yeah.
And so sort of fell into an interview at what used to be called AFI, and joined them pretty much straight out of university as a trainee commercial assistant. And from there, it just sort of took off. So I was fortunate to use my languages to travel, to set up sort of import relationships that just didn't exist. I guess this was sort of early 90s. So the retailers were really only just starting to stock fresh produce at all. And at that point, things were largely seasonal. So it was a really great time to join the industry because it was sort of all up for grabs, really.
Looking back at your career as you've been in multiple industries, but within one, if that kind of makes sense, what's kind of retained you in the industry? Because it's hugely challenging, right? It's hugely resilient, but it's really challenging.
I think I've been really fortunate because, pretty much every single role I've had, I've been working pretty much directly for farmers. And that's where I found my energy, just the passion and, love of their industry, the way they see themselves as custodians of nature, their resilience, you sort of bounce off that. I guess I'm also quite driven by well-being and health, and I guess handling a healthy product rather than, chocolate has always driven me. I've always wanted to really believe in what I'm selling.
One of the things I've noted over the course of time is whether it be at the dinners or when I'm looking at boards, a severe lack of diversity in our industry, to be frank. And I guess I'm curious to see your thoughts on how we increase that diversity, how we have different types of individuals, different thought processes coming at board level to be able to overcome the future hurdles, the future challenges. How do we go about that?
Oh gosh, where do I start? So I obviously, certainly in my early career, I was one of very few females at sort of operating at quite senior level. One of my non-exec roles now, where I'm working on behalf of green coffee producers. It's all the females that do all of the work on the farm. So it's sort of strange to go full circle. But I guess I probably put in a few more hours to try and compensate. But then equally, because I had the languages, I could access farms where perhaps some of my male colleagues couldn't because they didn't have that kind of social connection. To your point about diversity, for me, diversity is, and you've already just said it, it's kind of cognitive diversity. So two things that is, it's around all the sort of obvious things like age, gender, race, but also perhaps the less obvious things like socioeconomic background, but also around neurodiversity, because ultimately we've talked a lot around making adjustments within the workplace to try and accommodate people with different traits or different backgrounds or different working pattern expectations. And the bit, I guess, everyone needs to think about is just about having an environment where none of this is a thing and that the work environment is set up for everyone to be accommodated. You almost don't want that to be a thing. You just want it to be kind of pre-thought about, that everything in that work environment means that all of these sort of people find themselves entirely comfortable. There's no stigma, there's no bias. And I'm really, the article I read recently, I think Andy did, about succession, it was really good to see that he'd made a point in there of saying that, you know, you can't rely on finding the people that you've always found from food science backgrounds or agricultural colleges. And actually, people with science backgrounds, computer science backgrounds, humanities, they need to understand and see our industry. And in terms of youth, I think, you know, my other non-exec role is for BX Technologies, and I'm the oldest person there by probably 20 years. And it's amazing to see all these really sort of energetic, really smart, bright young things. And what Ben's done there is actually already forming the next level of the sort of exco, so that he's got his exco that are all very young themselves, but he's already forming and training up the next
mentoring,
level. And so I think not being shy to sort of say, right, these are kind of high potential individuals. Let's get behind them early on. I would say this because I'm a coach and mentor, but giving them access to coaching and mentoring, you know, younger in their career.
I think when we look at the industry as well, it's not always been seen to be the sexiest of industries, but it's so resilient. If you look at, you know, just through 2008 global financial crisis and what have you, every recession going, but we have such a resilient workforce, and people aren't going to stop eating, hopefully, right? It's not going to happen. But there's so many different careers that one can carve out a career within this industry. It's not just farming, or it's, you know, the commercial routes, the procurement routes, the HR, the finance. There's so many different routes. But we have to speak more about it, and we have to get to the younger audience sooner, don't we?
Yeah, and to be honest, it's both ends of the spectrum. You know, we're now in a position where you've got 5 different generations working in the workplace. And so, yes, it's sort of getting and getting in touch with that younger audience who are hugely motivated by businesses that do the right thing. And that might be in your community, it might be from a sustainability point of view.
Big point.
So those messages being loud and clear, you know, you are finding younger people being driven, sort of almost top 2 will be values of an organisation and how seriously they take their responsibilities, and maybe point 3 is you know, salary
money.
But at the other end, you've got people really wanting to add huge value well into their 70s, feeling like they're being put on the shelf. So
and we're missing, I can't help but think in some cases we're missing opportunities, right? When you think about all of the knowledge that some of these individuals in a more mature level have got, which may be socially expected to retire, there's got to be a case for part-time CEOs or mentors, or just retaining that amount of knowledge within the industry from a mentor and coaching perspective, right? Are those options readily available?
Not enough, but they should be. I mean, I'm fortunate now that I spend my time doing all the things I like. So, you know, I've got a sort of typical portfolio, if you like. But I think values drive a lot of what we do. And I think more and more, and you must find this, I guess, that, you know, people are making recruitment decisions on values first. So for the younger people, that's great news, because there's a kind of assumption that you're going to get trained the skills you need as long as you meet the values of whichever organisation. At the other end of the sort of age spectrum, if you like, I think people are struggling with these sort of free form, no real hierarchy organisations. They don't know how to behave. So I think there's sort of a job both ends of that age sort of dynamic to make those 2 sort of generations, if you like, feel as comfortable as possible to flourish. Because, as you say, the wealth of experience and knowledge, we were talking earlier about, you know, not being fearful to make mistakes. People at the other end of the age gap, they've done all the mistakes. They've got the T-shirt for all of these things and more.
That there has to be that opportunity to not just retain the knowledge, but to understand that you can make mistakes, that there's a mentoring opportunity that is there clear as day. But I think having an audience come through to see where one's career can go. I've had it in my career. I was terrible with time. I wore it as a badge of honor of how many hours I would work in a week, but I could have got it done so much quicker. When I became a parent, and there's a lot more need to get home and quicker, I managed to do the exact same workload considerably shorter. Right? That's just one example, but it's a case of passing that knowledge further down so these individuals can understand it and work with it and evolve it. It doesn't have to be that way of working, but it's terrible to see it at times when you've got individuals being retired off thinking, well, there's got to be a place for them. It might not be a role that exists almost naturally or historically, but there's got to be a role for that person within that company.
Yeah, and I think also companies that have early on, or maybe sort of at midpoint in your career, actively encouraged executives to go and maybe be a non-exec on another board in a sort of sister industry. You can sort of have this cross-pollination of ideas. It almost then gives that person the skills already to then, if they want to go on and become a non-exec director or an advisor, they've already kind of done a bit of that.
Yeah.
But also the as I said, cross-pollination of ideas and concepts is dynamite. You know, you pay
Absolutely.
consultants to come in and give you that for thousands, or you let somebody go to a board meeting once a month or once a quarter for free. I think the other thing, you know, having sat on several boards, I guess mainly the non-exec directors I would have sat opposite would have been retired guys who would have been absolutely top of the game in their day. But the way the non-exec kind of infrastructure works is that they're sort of there ad infinitum, really. You know, it's not like they have, I don't know, performance bonuses where if they don't perform it, then there's a, you know, performance discussion.
Yeah.
They're sort of often open-ended contracts. And I feel passionately, and that's why I've chosen to do this non-exec work now, that it's sort of more valuable to have somebody who's sort of perhaps a bit more current, but also recognise when and where they sort of add value. And certainly in two of the ones I've had over the last 5 years, you know, when there's been a change in agenda within the organisation, then I've stepped away because my skills then have been used for the agenda that they needed me for, and then they're into the next phase of whatever development and need something else. So I'm seeing more and more of this sort of advisory board kind of council thing evolving, where organisations strategize, hopefully, come up with a long-term strategic plan. I don't think this is done very well yet, but should then do a kind of gap analysis of all the people within their kind of board and exec and senior leadership team, and then sort of say, oh, right, okay, we really need to deliver X, Y, and Z, and then go to market to find those skills rather than just doing what they've always done. But maybe it's a shorter time horizon.
But maybe, but we stumble across the kind of non-exec director approach then. I was always fearful as a middle manager years ago coming up through the ranks. I was really fearful of non-execs. I see now what non-execs can offer, both by our organisation placing them and non-exec directors. Amazing, and without him we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Is there a changing face for non-execs? And almost two parts of the question. Is there a time period where a non-exec steps away? How does that kind of work? Or what are you seeing work, I guess?
I think it goes back to this piece around being clear what you want that non-exec to do. So, you know, most sort of adverts for non-execs now will stipulate that they ideally want you to have a background in X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
I suppose the one that probably won't change as radically is that it tends to go that you need to have a non-exec with a very sort of strong finance or legal background. And that's all about sort of due diligence, rigour and compliance. I wouldn't suggest that's going to change anytime soon.
No.
But most boards of a sort of medium-sized business and above will have at least 2 non-execs. And I would really advocate for that sort of second position being pretty fluid. And I think it's about understanding what your strategic direction is and seeing what you need. I've just recently, I'm quite privileged to be sort of a part-time CEO of our local theatre and arts centre.
Wow.
And what I've noticed in the trustees on the board there, which, you know, the whole board is trustees apart from myself, that they are all very much tailored to be quite formally either mentors for somebody within the management team. They're perhaps there because they've got a set of skills that, you know, a charity just can't afford, like marketing or tax advice, or they're there because they're really well networked and potentially could leverage some relationships for donors. And it's just so stark to me that that's a group of people who aren't paid for what they do, but they are matched entirely to what the charity needs.
Wow.
And then you apply that to a commercial business in the produce organisations and fresh food organisations and retailers, and you know, you probably haven't quite got that match right. So mentoring of the leadership team and being that sounding board and critical friend is critical for me.
Well, I love the idea of bringing people from outside the industry in, just to challenge the norm, come up with a different idea, which again kind of came back to one of our earlier points about the diversity piece, making sure that there's different kind of ideas. Because if we always just agree, we can preempt, we're going to have the same challenges, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Jacqui, you've been an absolute superstar. Thank you so much
Thanks
for coming in.
Nice to see you.
And you.
Cheers.
Thank you.